So, the biggest Palestine story to come out of Britain this week was, of course, the government's announcement that it would be suspending a small number of arms licenses to Israel. But in fact, this was a token measure, and it was announced on Monday by the Foreign Minister David Lammy, and it amounts to only 8.5% of British arms licenses to Israel. Considering Israel's openly declared intent to carry out a genocide in Gaza since the 7th of October, and the probable death toll of some 200,000 people bombed, shot, burned, and starved to death by the Zionist regime since then, Lammy's speech in Parliament announcing the measures was nothing less than outrageous soft peddling. In the speech, which you can read here on the Foreign Office website, he bizarrely said that there was a risk that the now suspended arms licenses might be used to commit or facilitate a serious violation of international humanitarian law. Lammy explained that out of the 350 arms licenses that Britain grants to allow exports to Israel's genocidal regime, only around 30 would be suspended. The Guardian reported that British military exports to Israel amounted to about the equivalent of $55 million in 2023. The Foreign Minister explicitly clarified that the biggest component of Britain's support for the Israeli genocide in Gaza would carry on as normal, and that is the 79 companies, British companies, that supply parts for the F-35 bomber jets currently being used to help annihilate Gaza. The arms trade expert and professor at the University of Sussex, Anna Stavrianakis, you can see her tweet here on the screen, said that Britain was still complicit with Israel's genocidal war in Gaza after these suspensions. And remember, these are only temporary suspensions of even this pitifully small number of arms licenses. And this is in no way an arms embargo. Several British governments in the past have carried out similar tokenistic exercises only to reverse them at a later date when campaigning has died down. And in fact, this measure that David Lammy took was far less than other governments have taken in the past, even including some conservative governments. In his speech, David Lammy was at pains to point out that, quote, "This is not an arms embargo," he said it explicitly, and that the measure would not, quote, "have a material impact on Israel's security." Lammy clarified that he still strongly supports Israel, even called himself a Zionist in the speech, and he parroted typical Israeli regime talking points about its non-existent right to exist and defend itself. The subtext of the speech was very clear. David Lammy and the rest of the British regime are still strongly supporting Israel's genocide in the Gaza Strip, an exterminationist campaign which is now threatening to engulf the West Bank too. Like most of the rest of the British government's key ministers, David Lammy is a supporter of Labour Friends of Israel and is in the pocket of the UK's Israel lobby. That fact, along with the British government's subservience to Washington DC, is why this government are highly unlikely to ever enact a real arms embargo on Israel. One of Lammy's first visits abroad after he was appointed to his post on the 5th of July this year was to occupy Palestine to meet with Israel's genocidal leaders. He met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, you can see him here, as well as Israel's supposedly centrist President Isaac Herzog, who is a man who's so racist that he made clear in October last year that the, quote, "entire nation of Palestinians" was the target of the genocidal campaign in Gaza. Let's remind ourselves of that clip, if you could play that one tomorrow.
Operating militarily according to rules of international law, period. Unequivocally. It's an entire nation out there that is responsible. It's not true. This rhetoric about civilians not aware, not involved, it's absolutely not true. They could have risen up, they could have fought against that evil regime which took over Gaza in a coup d'etat. But we're at war. We are at war. We're at war we are defending our homes. We're protecting our homes. That's the truth. And then when a nation protects its home, it fights. And we will fight until we break their backbone.
So yeah, that was Israel's president Isaac Herzog, who, like other Israeli ministers, has made explicitly clear that the entire Palestinian population is the target of the bombing campaign, of the genocide in Gaza, and not only the Palestinian fighters. The only reason that the Labour government has enacted even this token measure, something which is more of a smokescreen for British complicity in genocide than anything else, is to stave off the medium to long term threat to Labour's electoral prospects from its left. Now, remember, of course, that in July's election, Labour lost 4 of its seats to new independent lawmakers who campaigned mostly on the issue of ending the genocide in Gaza, and it also came within a hair's breadth of losing 2 other seats. Added to the expelled former Labour Party leader Jeremy Corbyn, who won his seat back as an independent, that makes up a small block of 5 in Parliament who are challenging Labour from its left. And you can see this letter here on the screen to the parliamentary speaker this week, which was released by this group, Corbyn and the other 4 independent MPs. Adnan Hussein, Ayub Khan, Iqbal Mohammed and Shaukat Adam, they announced this week they'd formed this new parliamentary grouping named the Independent Alliance. In a statement, Corbyn and the other 4 called for a total arms embargo and said that it was, quote, beyond shameful that it had taken the lives of tens of thousands of Palestinians for the government to admit to even a risk of British arms being used in the course of Israel carrying out war crimes. At the same time that the British regime was ensuring it would continue to support Israel's genocide, it sent another clear message that it would continue to do American, Israeli, and Israel lobby bidding. Britain's shadowy political police force, the so-called anti-terror squad, unleashed a new wave of repression against Palestine solidarity activists and journalists over the last few weeks. The journalist and streamer Richard Medhurst, as well as the high-profile activist and Twitter poster Sarah Wilkinson, were both interrogated by this so-called anti-terror police. Both had their phones and other digital equipment seized. Medhurst was seized travelling into the country in the airport, while Wilkinson's home was ransacked completely. She was only released after draconian bail conditions were imposed on her. Wilkinson's experience was particularly insidious, and she recounted it in an interview this past weekend on the Crispin Flintoff show. Here's a small clip, if we could just play that.
Well, I think we were woken up about it's about 7:10, and the street was full of police vehicles, black vans, police cars, police arrest vehicles. I don't know, about 16 or 17, mostly plainclothed. I suppose they're the anti-terror squad, some uniformed. And I thought, well, they're going to break down the door, so I may as well open the door. There's no point. I could see that they were going to break down the door, so I opened it, and then they just literally barged in. I asked for a warrant. They said they had one, but they weren't going to reveal it. So I asked again to see the warrant, and he said, I don't have to show it to you. And then they were in the house, and I was kind of frog marched upstairs. I wasn't allowed to get dressed. I wasn't allowed to take my medications for my Crohn's. Basically, I wasn't allowed to do anything apart from, once I was upstairs, I said, well, can I at least take my dressing gown off? And they slapped these handcuffs on, so I couldn't even do that. The handcuffs were so tight that it cut the circulation off to my hands and fingers, and they were very, very painful. They weren't going to release them or unscrew them in any way. And then, they sort of pushed my son against the wall, and I was sort of frog marched out into a van. And during the time that I was away, these balaclava clad men, I mean, a lot of them unmarked, literally ransacked the house, took every piece of computer equipment, every phone, even phones that.
Yeah, thanks, Tamara. You can watch the whole 45-minute interview. It's quite a long interview, but it's worth watching in full over on Crispin Flintoff's YouTube channel. And she goes on to explain that these draconian bail conditions were imposed, preventing her from using even a phone or any kind of computer or digital equipment. Similar repressive raids were carried out in December, as I reported for the Electronic Intifada back then, against the prominent Palestine solidarity activists Mick Napier from the Scottish Palestine Solidarity Campaign and Tony Greenstein, who, as well as being a prominent activist, is of course an occasional Electronic Intifada contributor and an author of a book about Zionism during the Holocaust. Greenstein's electronic devices were also confiscated, and he was banned by bail conditions from posting on X, formerly Twitter. However, Tony is now happily posting again on the platform after his lawyers successfully challenged that particular bail condition in court, so we can only hope that Sarah Wilkinson has good lawyers. Wilkinson's she's going to need them because her bail conditions were far more stringent and seemed to prohibit her from even using a phone at all, from taking part in modern society whatsoever. We're so reliant on phones now and internet access just for doing everyday things. Furthermore, according to her full account as given on the Crispin Flintoff show, the police didn't single out any particular tweet that she had made. That was supposedly that they had accused of being against the law, illegal, but rather what was presented to her lawyer when she was interrogated was effectively a whole year of her posts on the platform. The General Secretary of Britain's National Union of Journalists this week, together with the General Secretary of the International Federation of Journalists, wrote to Matt Jukes, the head of counter-terror policing, scare quotes, to ask for an urgent meeting about the situation. And in that letter, they said, quote, the police's actions risks a chilling effect on journalists fearing arrests for carrying out their work. In the letter, they said that the arrest of Richard Medhurst last month had shocked both journalists based in the UK and those around the world, and that, quote, actions by police in an apparent crackdown on genuine journalistic activity cause significant concern over efforts to stifle press freedom. This wave of repression is especially targeted at activists directly involved in stopping Israeli arms firms in Britain, especially Palestine Action. And we'll have Huda Amori, all being well, from Palestine Action here on the stream in a couple of weeks' time. The British regime is clearly engaged in a series of sweeping and calculated repressive measures to suppress the increasingly popular movement to stop Israel's genocide in Gaza. And I think it's time we got some answers as to why. What's your take on this story, Ali, if we can bring the others on now?
Well, thank you for that, Asa. I know there's been a lot of questions about the British move, the suspension of the arms licenses, and we're going to talk about that more. But on this repression, I mean, it's very clear across the so-called democratic West, this repression is taking place. Of course, it's been happening in Germany. I mean, first and foremost against Palestinians and allies in Germany, but as I've said, the German government even tried to ban me from speaking to an audience in Germany via Zoom. I mean, that's how just intense the repression is, and they, of course, tried to shut down two conferences that I was supposed to speak at in Germany. Just examples. In France, the same things are happening. It's happening to a lesser extent in Belgium. It happened to our colleague David Cronin a few months ago when he was supposed to speak at a conference in the Netherlands. He came on the live stream and spoke about that. So, and in the United States, of course, as we've said, it's slightly different because we have the First Amendment and the government cannot be as blatant as in the UK and Germany, where there's no legal protections for free speech whatsoever, contrary to what people might think. It just doesn't exist. There's nothing like the First Amendment. So in the US, the repression is done through universities, through social media companies, through more indirect means. But I think it's a sign of panic. And I don't know Sarah Wilkinson personally, But I do know that she does have a large platform on Twitter, and so she reaches a lot of people, and she pierces, as do others who, in independent media, on social media, she pierces the information bubble created by official government media like the BBC, which takes its orders directly from the Foreign Office and directly from the government, and reflects government policy, just like any other state media in any so-called third world country, even though the BBC pretends to be independent. So this is really, in a way, the British government enforcing its monopoly on speech. And that's what, protecting the BBC's monopoly to propagandize the population and to lie to them about this genocide.
Yeah, and again, it's a way to try to create this chilling effect. Whether it's here in the U.S. or in the U.K. or elsewhere in Europe, to try and intimidate people from being critical of Israel's genocide in Gaza and the politicians that support, encourage, and cheerlead it. So yeah, we're gonna. I'm looking forward to speaking with Hoda of Palestine Action next week here on the live stream.
I
But
think in 2 weeks. Yeah.
in 2 weeks,
Yeah.
that's right. I wanted also to bring up the point about the UK arms exports that you explained, Asa, because that's had an effect here on this side of the Atlantic as well.